You learned a little about the drop-down list control in Lesson 116. The drop-down list control is a little different to the controls that you've worked with so far in this session. List-based controls like the drop-down list contain multiple items, each with their own set of properties. They also have properties and events that affect every item in the list. In previous lessons, the checkbox list and radio button list controls were mentioned, both of which work in a very similar way to drop-down list controls. Radio button list and list box controls are also based on lists and are also very similar. Everything that you learn about the drop-down list control in this lesson can be applied to the other list-based controls as well. To begin this lesson, open the My Project sample file from your Sample Files folder. And open controlstest.aspx in Design View. Before continuing, remove both radio button controls from the page, then open the Code Behind file, and remove the Radio Button Choice 1 Checked Changed Event Handler. Now add a new drop-down list control to the page. And set its ID property to drop-down list test. Now you're going to add some items to your drop-down list. You might remember doing this in Lesson 116. Open the Quick Tasks menu of the drop-down list and click Edit Items. Now click Add to add a new item to the drop-down list. Set the new item's text property to Product 1 and set the value property to 1. Now in the same way, create a Product 2 with a value of 2 and a Product 3 with a value of 3. And click OK. You might be wondering what the value property is for. Items in drop-down lists are allowed to have both a text property that is shown to the user and a value property that is hidden from the user but is visible to your C# code. The value property is especially useful when your drop-down list control is linked to items in a database. List-based controls can be made to retrieve their lists from a database instead of typing them in manually. You'll learn how to do this in Lesson 11 too. Next, add a Selected Index Changed Event Handler to your control. The Selected Index Changed Event Handler fires when the user changes the selected item in the drop-down list. You might be wondering what's meant by index. As well as the text and value properties, each item in a drop-down list control has an automatically generated index property. These index numbers are always unique and are used to identify a specific item. The selected index property contains the index number of the currently selected item in the drop-down list. All lists in ASP.NET are zero-based. This means that the first item in the list has an index of 0 instead of 1 as you might expect. When you run the example code later in this lesson, you'll see that the index number of the first item is 0. Now add the following code to the new event handler. Response.write drop-down list test.selected value. This code will display the value property of the item that the user has selected. Now add a new line and add the code response.write and an HTML break tag. This code will simply add an HTML break tag after the value. The HTML break tag adds a line break. Now add another new line and add the code response.write drop-down list test.selected-item.text. This code will display the contents of the text property of the selected item. Now add another line to place a break tag. That's response.write break, and add one last line with the code response.write drop-down list test.selected index. This code will display the index property of the selected item. Now view the page in your browser. And try changing the value in the drop-down list. Nothing happens because the page isn't posted back. You've seen the same behavior with the checkbox and radio button controls. Close the browser, return to controlstest.aspx in Design View, and set the Auto Postback property of your drop-down list to True. Now view the page again, change the value in the drop-down list, and this time the selected index changed event handler runs, and each of the relevant properties are displayed. Close your web browser now, remove the drop-down list control, and remove the event handler from the code behind file. Now close Visual Studio, saving your changes if prompted. You've now completed Lesson 4.7. Use the drop-down list control.